Hello and welcome to another episode of Tacklebox Talks. Firstly, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the FRDC, and also all our member organisations. And speaking of FRDC, our next guest is from FIDC. That would be Matt Barwick, speaking to us about what could the future of fishing look like in Australia. So why don't we get straight to it, and we'll talk to Matt in one moment. Hi everyone, and I'd like to introduce Matt Barwick here from the FIDC. He's in the office. He's forever working. Well, it always seems like that. Matt, how you doing?
Yeah, really good, Adam. Yourself?
Oh, not too bad, thanks. So Matt, tell us about yourself. What do you do?
Well, I'm just like another 3.5 or so million people in Australia, and that I'm a fisher at heart, and that's sort of led me to working in fisheries management and research and all other things. Now I'm working for the Fisheries Research and Development Corporation, and we invest to basically improve fishing and aquaculture in Australia. I work in our strategy and planning area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So while we get to it, we'll ask you plenty of questions, and you can tell us all about what kind of innovative things we're looking at. So you fished and worked in the fishing aquaculture most of your life. So what sort of changes are we going to see over the next 10 years?
Yeah, well, I suppose like most people, I imagine, listening tonight and that might listen later on. I got into fishing when I was about 5 years old, introduced to it by my dad. There's a social scientist from University of Canberra, Jackie Shermer, that's done some great work that shows there's this narrow window when we're young, when most of us pick up fishing and most of us are introduced to it by our family members. So I'm a pretty unimaginative data point in that little story. But in about that, nearly 40 years or so that I've been fishing, when I look back, fishing hasn't actually changed that much. The gear's gotten fancier, and I guess we've innovated some new ways to target species. So who would have thought when I was young that whiting would become a sports fish that we target on topwater lures? But the fundamentals are essentially the same. There's about, at last count, like I said, 3.4 million Australians, or about 20% of us, recreationally fish, and we know that we go fishing mainly to relax, to get outdoors, to spend time with friends, and they're pretty static throughout time, the reasons that we go fishing. There's lots of benefits that we get from fishing. So people, returned servicemen report reduced anxiety and depression. People with disabilities report improved self-esteem. Women recovering from breast cancer surgery report therapeutic benefits from fly fishing. Social ties, there's the research that's been done demonstrates lots of really nice benefits, and so that's partly why so many people fish, and that's partly why people spend so much money when they fish. They spend about $1.8 billion a year when they fish at last estimate. So we're in a pretty good position, recreational fishing, right now, but it does make me stop and think, are we where we planned we would be? Because in truth, I think all of these wonderful things that I just rattled off might have been largely a result of serendipitous happenstance.
Yeah.
We certainly didn't have a single plan that we all knew and worked together to achieve. And so in terms of what the future looks like, we need to ask, are we comfortable to leave our future up to serendipitous happenstance, or would we like to develop a picture of what we want to achieve and work together to make that a reality? That's something that I feel really strongly about, and something that I think we don't talk enough about in recreational fishing in Australia.
So you just mentioned there a plan, and I always use the motto, fail to plan, you plan to fail. So what kind of future do you think might be possible?
This is interesting, right? So the possibilities are almost endless. So do we want a nation where as many people fish as possible? Let's say we shift the needle up to 30% of the population fish. Perhaps we have a free-to-air TV series like MasterChef, where people turn up and they get a different challenge species to catch each series. Maybe that's simulcast and 1.5 million people watch that. Expenditure, let's say fishing expenditure goes through the roof, 3.6 billion per year. That might all be nice, and you might assume that would reflect a more embedded, that fishing is more embedded in our culture in Australia. But I wonder if the people that are fishing on the end of Morty Alec Pier in Victoria would be happy with another 10 people standing next to them, or with another 50 boats lining up in the morning at Shady Camp to drop their boat in the water. So there are some wonderful elements of that. There are some challenges. Maybe we want fewer fishes, but more fish to catch. So in that circumstance, we need to have much healthier waterways to promote greater productivity, so more fish for us to catch. Of course, a smaller fishing population would probably translate to a lower expenditure on fishing, and that might translate to reduced political influence. So there might be some elements around that, or maybe our shared aspirations are for the same number of fishes but greater access. So perhaps more boat ramps, more reservoirs open to fishing and stocked more regularly. Maybe we have more access to areas of marine parks that are currently we're not able to fish in, more artificial reefs, more stocked urban lakes, for example. So they're just only 3 options. And in truth, there are probably infinite options. Any combination of those things might be true. But I think the thing is, we need to ask, are we actually having a conversation to work out which of those future scenarios or something else entirely we need to work together to achieve? I don't think we are. And I think that what results in that is probably, we're probably trying to achieve any number of those different things in different places around Australia, but without a degree of coordination or unity that we really need to make sure that fishing is in a good position into the future.
All right. There's a lot to process, isn't it? So how might we go about developing a shared future for fishing in Australia?
No, that might seem like a giant mountain. When we've got a circumstance where we've got people chasing 1,000-pound but behemoths with reels the size of Milo tins off cans, whilst there are people chasing palm-sized trout on size 32 flies that fit on the end of a pen, you might ask the question, how could we possibly develop a single vision that we can all subscribe to and push in that same direction? It's too diverse. But the answer is we probably have to. Planning is important. I agree with you completely, Adam. It sets intent. It helps you to garner resources, and it helps you to spend those resources wisely on not that thing, but that thing, because that's the thing that pursues that vision that we agree upon. So we have to do that, and that means we have to deal with that diversity. There are definitely ways that we go about it, but that saying that you just put up on the screen there really summarizes it for me. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So if we don't have a plan, how will we know if we've even arrived at a place where we want to be, or how will we possibly put in place a strategy that takes us in a direction that we want to go? Because we won't have clarity on what that is. So I suppose one point I'd make is that, fortunately or unfortunately, recreational fishing can take comfort in the fact that we're in good company, in that we don't have a plan, because a lot of industries and a lot of organisations, a lot of interests don't have a plan. My role in strategy and planning, we have to invest in research, we do invest in research and development to improve fishing and aquaculture in Australia. And every 5 years, we develop a strategic plan. And in order to do that, to work out how do we spend our money to give best effect to the aspirations of fishers in Australia, we need to know where fishers in Australia want to go. And so the fact there wasn't a plan when we developed our last strategic plan was a challenge, but we had to deal with that same challenge that we were just talking about, that diversity. So I just mentioned the diversity in recreational fishing with marlin fishers and trout fishers. Now zoom out So the Fisheries Research and Development Corporation, our stakeholders are recreational fishers, but also, of course, commercial wild harvest fishers and aquaculturists, indigenous fishers, the seafood consumers themselves, and the post-harvest sector, the people that, between the people that catch fish on a boat and the ones that put it on your plate. Tremendous diversity, very different interests in some regards, but there are similarities. And so the complexity is really high, and we just simply have to look for those things that unify us, that we all agree upon, and build a shared vision around those things. I think that's really important.
So we've established that we need to plan. I'm a huge fan of making plans. So how exactly do we get 3 to 5 million Australian rec fishers get in and develop a shared idea?
Well, see, from a methodological perspective, there are as many different ways of developing a plan as there are colours of Tassie Devils or something like that. There's a lot of different types, but they all have their strengths and they all have their weaknesses. But what I will say is we can no longer plan the way we used to plan.
Right.
We always, as humans, we tend to look at what's happened in the past, our history, our performance, and from that we develop an understanding of what has happened, and then we use that to project into the future. That might work in some circumstances, and it might have served us to some extent in the past, but it certainly won't into the future. And if you could just roll through that next slide too, Adam. That's particularly true right now. So obviously we all know the year that we just had, but giant bushfires, floods, droughts, heat waves, marine heat waves, of course, the COVID pandemic, trade friction with other nations, and of course the election that's really just playing out as we speak. And so all of these things compound a degree of uncertainty, and they mean that looking back to develop predictions for the future, and there's a bunch of other things, climate change and whatnot, that I haven't even mentioned, those approaches won't work for us anymore. And so what we have to actually do is have a conversation and use methods that make us more comfortable with being uncomfortable, comfortable with being uncertain, because that's the nature of the planning environment that we're in. But the thing of it is, as people, like I said, we don't like those things. So we tend to choose ways of planning that give us a false degree of comfort and control. That's why those projections into the future make us feel safe. But the answer is, it's the equivalent of, those toys that parents have with like a fake steering wheel on the back of the driver's seat, and the kid sits in the back with the steering wheel, and it looks like it's driving somewhere, but it doesn't control anything. Those sort of ways that we plan, where we predict what the future will hold, are like that. They give an illusion of control, but they're not satisfactory as a way of helping us to respond to what might happen in the future. And that's really what we need to do.
So we might rehash a little bit there. So what sort of problems do you see in how planning has been done in the past?
Well, this slide here really sums it up quite well. But I think in essence, what we do is, so with this graph that you've just shown up, as you can see along the bottom axis, there's uncertainty. So uncertainty goes from low to high. And on the vertical axis is urgency. So from not urgent to very urgent. And in the not urgent and highly certain space, it's very predictive. And we tend to take tools that are useful in a predictive space and then apply them in a space where uncertainty and urgency is quite high, which you would argue a lot of the stuff we've seen in the last few years have been. That's the way we tend to do things. And so fundamentally, of all the limitations in the way that we have planned in the past, it largely comes down to that. It comes down to the fact that we're bringing a knife to a gun show when it comes to dealing with uncertainty and high velocity issues. And so things like scenario planning, where you don't try and predict the future, but you just develop lots of alternate possible futures. And you're not trying to pick which one's right. You're just trying to ask the question, if any of those came true, what would we do? That's a really good, it's actually one of the best ways of dealing with uncertainty. So I think what I'm trying to say is, as recreational fishers, even though we do it for fun, we probably can't leave the future of fishing up to someone else to control, or just wait and see what happens. We actually have to decide what needs to happen and put a plan in place. And in terms of how we do that planning, we have to do things like scenario planning that help us to just consider, no matter what comes at us, will we be prepared? What decisions must be made?
So you've spoken about that. So tell us about the process that FIDC's taken to develop that strategic plan that they've been.
Yeah, sure. So as I said, we had a challenge at the start, which is we needed to work out how to invest in research and development to deliver outcomes, but we weren't clear on what those outcomes were because the fishing and aquaculture community needed to explore them. And so we went through a process where we actually used scenario planning. So we developed 4 different scenarios of the future, ranging from quite wonderful to very challenging for fishing and aquaculture. So in some of those scenarios, environmental health was heavily degraded. Climate change was really having a significant effect. Fisheries productivity was really quite challenged. There was economic collapse. There was even circumstances of a viral pandemic in one of those scenarios. Who knew at the time that was actually quite, it was portending a pretty challenging future, right through to wonderful outcomes where people are making a lot of money. We were talking about and managing towards optimizing well-being of individuals in the sectors and a bunch of other things. So we basically developed these different worlds and asked, if that world came true, what would that mean? And that gave us a bunch of different insights. And those insights helped us to really start to group those insights and make sense of them all. And I think you might have a slide there as well, Adam, about that. So we did those 4 scenarios, which I mentioned, which are sort of in the center of that screen. And we got hundreds and hundreds of insights from the people that we consulted with across fishing and aquaculture. And they broke down into about 14 different themes that you can see in those circles. And I'm not sure if you can read them there, but essentially they're about culture and values, markets and marketing, technology and data, innovation, societal health and well-being, social license, cost and revenue, influence, resource sharing, building of relationships, sustainability, leadership and decision-making, people and capacity. So a bunch of different themes. And we use those themes to work out what the outcomes needed to be that we were going to invest to pursue over the next 5 years. And now the fun begins. We've just delivered the new plan. It's on our website, www.frdc.com.au. And we'll be undertaking investment over the next 5 years to try and help those outcomes happen. And I think actually there might be a slide of those outcomes as well, possibly. Yeah, right. So that slide there shows 5 outcomes that came out of that process. And they are growth for enduring prosperity, best practice and production systems. So understanding best practice and making sure as many people use it as possible. Building a culture that is inclusive and forward-thinking for fishing and aquaculture. So understanding the unspoken rules and norms and behaviours that we all just abide by as members of fishing and aquaculture, and asking which ones of those serve us, which ones of those are not helpful, and how do we adjust those ones that don't help us to move into a future confidently. Equitable and secure access for aquatic resources. So we understood that underpinning all of the things we were going to try and achieve, people needed to feel safe and secure about their access to be able to be involved in planning and preparing for the future. And community trust, respect and value. So the way people perceive fishing and aquaculture in the community, making sure that they trust it, that they respect it and they value it. And we identified 5 enabling strategies. So we knew that digitization and advanced analytics was going to be critical into the future. The world is moving digital and fishing and aquaculture needs to as well. We need to help invest to enable that. But also strengthening adoption for transformation. So we do a lot of great research. How do we make sure that the people that need to know that work exists, know it exists, and pick up the results and want to use those recommendations? We want to increase the amount of innovation and entrepreneurship in fishing and aquaculture. So openness to trying different things and trying novel solutions to problems. We need to build capability and capacity across fishing and aquaculture, so people have the skills to do those sorts of things. And we need to provide these foundational data sets and information so that we all operate off the same evidence base as we make decisions. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the heart, the beating heart of our strategic plan, 5 outcomes and 5 enabling strategies. But there's some challenges there. So let me ask a question. So for the first outcome, for growth for enduring prosperity, I don't know if anyone who's listening in might have any thoughts on what does growth mean to you as a member of fishing and aquaculture? So how would you think about what growth might mean in the future for fishing and aquaculture? If anyone has any thoughts on that, feel free to drop that into the chat. I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
That's right. If you want to answer Matt's question, please do leave a comment and get to it. So you mentioned the 5th outcome there about community trust. So do you think the rec fishing community has a trust problem in Australia?
You know, if you look at the stats at first blush, you might not think so. We do community surveys. Again, they're available on our website, frdc.com.au. And the most recent one in about 2018, we asked a question of people in the community, do you think that fishing and aquaculture is sustainable? And we asked that about each of the sectors. And some of the data that we got from that, you can see up there. So what you can see there is that 61% of those interviewed thought that fish farming was sustainable. 55% thought that recreational fishing was sustainable. So second only to fish farming, and recreational fishing outperformed traditional fishing, horticulture, eggs, beef, dairy, pork, overall fishing, commercial wild catch. So recreational fishing, in terms of how people perceive it with regards to sustainability, is quite good. When you look under the surface, of course, sustainability is only one dimension of how fishing is perceived. And if you could just go through to the next slide there, Adam. There's some great work by social scientists Karen Alexander and Kirsten Abernethy, and they did some work to explore what are the things that underpin support of community of fishing and aquaculture, and there's a bunch of them that you can see there. But essentially, it's important that the community believe that there is strong government oversight over fishing and aquaculture, that there is presence of fair decision making, that there's demonstration of acting in alignment with societal norms. So what society would expect of us, that we're actually doing that. That there's a shared vision. Now, I've already spoken about that. Of course, we don't yet have a shared vision of fishing and aquaculture. Connectedness to community. Now, recreational fishers, we tend to say, hey, we are community, but we're not. We're 20% of the community. There's 80% of Australians that think and behave differently to recreational fishers. And I don't know that necessarily we have those strong relationships that we need. We have some, we can always do better. But you can see all these different determinants of support. And there are some, if I'm candid, that we really have to do some work.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
Yeah, so it might be a little controversial of me to say so, but the one in the second top left there, presence of fair decision making. So there are examples in recent history where decisions have been made that affect users of aquatic resources and fisheries that have been largely political, not necessarily evidence-based. And that might be wonderful if we're on the receiving end of a decision like that, but all users of aquatic resources should rally against decisions like that, because when a decision becomes political and not evidence-based, there's every chance that the next one will not be in your favour. And if there might be another slide after that too, Adam. I grabbed an article from the Daily Mail, and albeit this isn't necessarily one that was yesterday, but it's certainly one that grabbed my attention, where this is a couple of blokes.
I remember this from a couple of years ago or so. Actually about 4 or 5 years ago now, just north of where I live, and it got a lot of traction.
Right, yeah. Well, so I used to live up in Port Stephens, and we used to love sitting by the gantry as the Port Stephens trailer boat fishing comp came in and people were weighing their fish. But through the years, we would watch this from awe as people came in, through to a lot of heckling. It was clear that the behaviour, the beliefs of people around those events was shifting. And the social media around these guys when they caught this shark was pretty phenomenal. But when you tune into it, this comment at the top that says, as bad as those Americans shooting lions and elephants, fishermen catch huge tiger shark that could be a new world record. So comparing it to big game on the savannas, you know, is a change. And then some of those comments there where they said they need to protect and not kill, that it's disgusting, that you could you not have photographed and tagged it. So what we're seeing is a shifting of a fraction of society, and the question of how much of the society those sort of views represent is something that is of interest to all of us, because it has a real implication for the future of fishing and aquaculture.
In the defence of the association that after that part of the I recall that they put a notice out to say use better judgment when you're putting pictures online. And I think that actually has worked fairly well. We've seen people use better judgment when it comes time to putting like that online, because once they're out on there, they're there forever. Once it's on the internet, it's very hard to remove.
You're right, and that's an effective strategy, but it's also a strategy, if I'm candid, that responds to the symptoms and not the cause.
Yeah.
So you can stop it, you can stop people looking at it, but if society don't want those things to happen, and those things are still happening in a public environment, they'll take their own photos. Yeah. We're in an environment now where you must always assume that someone's looking over your shoulder with a camera, and so what I'm getting at is that comment that the determinant of support that I mentioned of alignment with societal norms. The reality of it is we need to understand what society expects of us, and we need to look at all of our practices objectively and ask, does that pass the pub test? And if not, what do we do about that?
So what do you think we should do to ensure that we continue to build community trust?
Well, I think that we need to consider in a very measured and evidence-based way where we're sitting next to those in relation to those determinants of support. I loved your presentation last week about citizen science, and I think it's a piece of the puzzle. So showing that natural curiosity, and most importantly, collecting the data to support the stories that we have, the opinions that we have, is really important. Building strong relationships with non-fishing community, ensuring that all of the decision making is based on evidence, whether or not it runs in the favour of recreational fishes is really a secondary consideration. But making sure that every decision is evidence based, that's really strong. Making sure that we're telling our stories, so where there are good stories to tell, making sure that everyone understands best practice and uses best practice. That's why it's in our R&D plan. So there's a lot of things that we need to do. But I think one of the things that I want to say, and I have to declare an interest here. So one of the things that we can all do is pick up the code of practice. So there's a national code of practice for recreational fishing, and there's 3.4 million fishers. And I don't know what percentage of them know that exists or know what's in it, but I think we need to get to a point where every one of us can recite that. And there's some wonderful initiatives like Ozfish Unlimited. And as I say, I need to declare an interest. I'm very keenly involved in it and really think what they're doing is great. But that is a group made by recreational fishers for recreational fishers to improve fish habitat and make more fish in the process. But there's something in it for the people getting involved, the fishers. But of course, at the end of the day, we're making rivers, estuaries, oceans healthier, and that's a wonderful thing to do and to be seen to be doing. And so we need to do more things like that. We need more people involved in things that show that we care. I think that they're really important to ensuring that we have a bright and stable future, and that we have a chance of pursuing the vision that we set for ourselves, whatever that is, into the future.
How do you feel about if we go to a Q&A?
Yeah, not a problem.
Okay, no worries. We've got some questions here. I noticed Danny Simpson from over in South Australia. He asked, can we ever have a plan that is really representative of the needs and aspirations of most rec fishers? before you
It's a good
answer
question,
that,
Danny.
I know you and I and quite a lot of other people have spoken about a huge initiative where we gather a heck of a lot of people from all over Australia in specialised workshops dotted all over Australia, and we really knuckle down and come up with a grand plan, you could say. So coming back to Danny's question, do you think we'll ever have a plan that is really representative of the aspirations of most rec shows?
Yeah, I do. G'day, Danny. I do. I do think we can. See, here's the challenge. In order to get to a point where it accommodates all of the diverse views of fishing and aquaculture, we need to get a higher level vision. But in doing that, we need to get to a point where it's not beige, it's not vanilla. It still has to mean something and resonate. And I think that we can, and we do that by developing a very rich story, by describing the future in as much detail as possible, not a single sentence slogan, but something that really considers at a deeper level, the aspirations of all recreational fishers. There's a very rich story to tell in terms of the things that unify us all. Some of the things that I mentioned earlier about more fish, more access, healthier waterways, they're probably true for the majority. And so I think that we can, but I think there's an American president, I don't remember who it was, that said plans are useless, but planning is essential, or something like that. What he was really getting at is the paper itself is not where the value is, because as soon as you've written a plan, it's probably out of date. The value is in having the conversations and building the consensus about what might be. That's where all the exciting stuff really happens, in my opinion.
I've been learning a lot the last few years around creating a vision, and in that vision you create these shared values, and a lot of that we can all accept those shared values that a huge way drive plans that we created. So you're absolutely right.
I do want to say too, there's a wonderful opportunity. So the Australian government has committed to helping all sectors of fishing and aquaculture develop something called the National Fishing Plan. So that's a blueprint for how we grow and make fishing and aquaculture in Australia better. That's something that's going to be happening this year, and I'd encourage as many recreational fishers as possible to understand where that's up to and engage with that process. So you can get to that on the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment's webpage and look for the National Fishing Plan, and just engage with that, because that's a really exciting opportunity to develop a shared future that also considers the desired futures of commercial wild harvest and aquaculture. And here's the thing: at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We all want healthier waterways and more vibrant fish stocks that we can all enjoy. So as much as we see ourselves as different in some sort of a tribal sense, there's more that we share in common than there is that divides us, I suppose.
I think I might have to tap the shoulder of someone in federal fisheries to talk about what you spoke about then, because I think it would be great to have a lot more rec fishers from all over Australia participate in that too. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
Cass Price from Ozfish, she asked, I don't think we explained sustainability to the community well enough, and the term is overused. What do you think about that one?
1000%, Cass. Sustainability means so many different things. To a small business owner, they might think I'm talking about their economic sustainability, making sure their business is there into the future. Of course, environmental sustainability might require a very different thing in certain contexts. I completely agree that as a word has almost lost its meaning because of the diversity of its meaning and the fact that it's often used and misused out of context. But so I think we have a real story to tell, and I completely agree with that point, Cass, about there's a vision that relates to what our waterways could be. Once again, when you look back through the history books and you read the oral accounts of what our waterways used to be and where fish used to live that they don't live anymore, and the numbers and the diversity, it's staggering to even someone that spent their entire career working in fishing and aquaculture. So the idea that we could develop a vision again of what our waterways could be, and yeah, that word sustainability is relevant there, but really it's about something that maybe is more exciting to people, which is just about fizzing, teeming, frothing waterways full of fish with really beautiful places to go and cast a line. They're things that I think that we can talk about that achieve the same purpose.
Can you imagine what the fishing was like pre-Captain Cook? I got a massive GT over in Exmouth last year, but you could go just about the top half of Australia anywhere and get that size GT quite easily 200 plus years ago. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I really wish we had something like that, but we can dream and dream big. Um,
Well, we can dream and we
yeah,
can do things.
that's right.
Yeah, I think it's the dreaming. If it leads to action, we definitely there's a lot that we can do. Mm.
Scotty Rigby
And
asks, sorry
yeah,
for cutting you off.
no, go ahead. No, fair. Go far
Scotty
away.
Rigby asks, can aquaculture help repopulate the ocean? This might be something
Yeah,
that you're uniquely qualified to answer.
it definitely can, and it does. You know, I suppose we do. There is a lot of stocking that happens, and a lot of those fish that were stocked have been grown up in hatcheries as part of the aquaculture industry, sort of the hatchery part of it. And of course, every now and again, there's a cyclone that might upend an aquaculture pen, some of the fish escape, and and obviously some of the benefits. Port Stephens, when the aquaculture pen ruptured and the yellowfin tuna got out, recreational fishers there had never seen that kind of fishing and might never again. I suppose that's one of the things that actually exercises my mind when those accidents happen and we think, oh, we need to stop those accidents from happening. When we look at the economic and social benefit when those things do happen, we maybe would start to ask different questions like, how do we do those things safely and predictably so that there's multiple benefits across sectors? And of course, we need to consider things like genetics, and they're really important. We need to make sure we're looking after the environment. But I think in answer to the question, aquaculture can have a strong role to play when we consider those things like genetics and making sure we're not putting species into places that they don't belong. But we also need to consider there's a lot of other cryptic things going on there. So a fish that's brought up in a hatchery, it feeds on things that aren't natural and it's not used to predators. And so its survival is probably different in the wild. And so I think we also shouldn't just pour fish into the water thinking that we're fixing the ills of poor waterway health. It won't fix those problems. It's a Band-Aid. We really do need to get in and improve the health of the waterways because they're far more capable of improving their own productivity than anything we can do in a hatchery.
So, just speaking on that, what's your thoughts on what's happened very recently in South Australia with what I understand, it's Australian first propagating juvenile snapper in controlled conditions, and they only released them into water there a day or two ago. So, what's your thoughts on that one?
Look, I think that we'll continue to innovate, and we should, in terms of closing life cycles and using those those technology breakthroughs in a bunch of different ways, new market opportunities for aquaculture species, rehabilitation opportunities. Again, considering all those things I mentioned about genetics and whatnot, I think it's wonderful. Snapper, we need to give a helping hand to snapper. There are some things going on. Not all of them are necessarily clear to us at this time, but we know that it's a fish that's in some ways loved to death, and I think that stocking is part of the solution. I think that habitat rehabilitation is too. It's probably a multi-pronged approach, as is the case for so many other species. Yeah.
Danny Simpson from South Australia asked another good question. And I've got a big part to play in this too. It's citizen science is a real and valuable part, but many traditional fishery scientists see it as unreliable and a distraction. Politicians see it as an opportunity for ribbon cutting. Before you jump in and answer that, a big part of rec fishing citizen science and way it's going to head, it's because of the technology that we've got now, and a lot of the information that is captured through our technology, like our phone, and different acoustics and sonar equipment, the whole range of a new equipment that's just on the verge of being released very soon. And because that technology is collecting that information in very controlled ways, the rec fisher doesn't have to do a lot of that detailed collection. It's doing it for us. So all of a sudden, rec fishing citizen science, the data that's collected, becoming robust. What's your thoughts on it?
It is. I think a couple of things. Citizen science as a process for helping us to understand our surroundings. If you want to look at it as a tool or a method, every tool and method has its strengths and weaknesses. And let's not think for a moment that a team of scientists on a boat doing a detailed scientific method doesn't have strengths and weaknesses. It does. It's expensive, for example. So citizen science has a role to play. One of the wonderful benefits of citizen science is the way that it can build consensus among communities. So when people see themselves something that is happening, it doesn't matter if it's got 95% confidence limits, they believe it. And when they believe it, they'll accept a response to try and address that thing that concerns them. But I also think that citizen science hasn't even touched the sides when it comes to what we can do. So most of the way we use citizen science is sort of outward looking. So as you say, recording when we catch a fish and where we catch it, and aggregating that information up. But of course, we've got smart devices, and so when I catch a fish, it says something about what my body physiologically is experiencing, and we can start to have a really keen understanding of what we experience when we go fishing. Those things I mentioned earlier about reduced anxiety and depression and morbidity in returning servicemen, and a whole bunch of other measurable and physiological changes in heart rate and sweat and whatnot. We can start to talk about the way we benefit as individuals, as well as observing our surroundings and through citizen science. So I think the application is exciting, and we haven't even touched the sides.
It's a really great way to engage the rec community too. But my thought I just had then was it's great that we're collecting all this information, but what's the point if it's just going to sit on a shelf? We've actually got to do something.
Yeah.
And government is always nervous around that big word that starts with A, advocacy. But really time that we band together as a huge community and create a new plan, a new future. We've got the technology now. We've got the methods of communication. We've got the right people in the right parts of Australia. So it's a matter of getting together and getting on with doing it.
Yeah, no, that's right. And look, some people might take a year like 2020 or the start of 2021 as an excuse for paralysis with the uncertainty so high. How could we possibly plan? We just have to act day to day. And that's what some people are doing. I think it's a perfect time to plan. There are opportunities that are being presented here that we've never seen before, we might never see again. And we need to be having conversations about how the world is changing and what it means and how we respond to it. So, there are methods and they work, but it requires people coming together and working together. So there's a unity piece. We need to be better at working together. And that will help us to have a conversation about the future we want and how we need to get there.
What was that question that you asked our viewers before? You recall?
I wanted to know how they would, in terms of our outcome in our R&D plan. The first outcome is growth for enduring prosperity, and I wanted to know what does that mean to you? So, what is growth for fishing and aquaculture, and particularly for recreational fishing? What does that mean to you? How would you measure that? What does success look like? And if there are any views there, I'd certainly love to hear them.
For me, I big goals that are finally reached. Well, as long as we're heading in that direction. For example, restoring the kelp forests of Australia, like on the southern half of Australia. That the amount of productivity come from storing so much of that goes such a long way. Another huge goal, which would see huge productivity, would be a fish screen on every single pump, both domestic and commercial, through the entire Murray-Darling Basin system. Can you imagine the amount of fish that are lost through those pump systems and would be no longer affected by them? got the technology to do it. Just a matter of convincing government to invest, short-term pain for long-term gain. So yeah, for me, Malcolm Poole just says increasing the opportunities and experiences that recreational fishers could be exposed to break down the barriers. So that's a really good one, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And look, the reason I asked that question is because growth can and should be measured in so many ways. I'm really encouraged that in this conversation, the first thing we didn't say is more money. You know, because growth as humans, it's the easiest thing to try and measure, and it's the thing we certainly focus on. Economic growth is important, but there's so much more to it.
There's got to be a bias, I believe, and it can be 51-49, but it's a bit like a car needs fuel, so fuel is the money, but the car is the primary thing. So you know, having those huge goals and doing and meeting those targets, money's the tool to get us there. But
totally. And look, as a research funding organisation, that's what we do. We invest. But in terms of the point that you raised about how do we attract government investment in these big goals, you know, when over a 48-hour period, millions of dollars was able to be raised from the community to restore, obviously, a famous chapel that burnt down in Europe. Government isn't the only answer here. We will definitely look to try and be a component of the solution, but I think the real key to cracking, revitalising our waterways and creating fisheries like we haven't seen in our generation is about helping people to understand the role that they can play in contributing to those things. So crowdsourcing of, you know, like creating a vision that excites people enough that they want to contribute to that. That's really something that we need to do. I think it's critical.
Perhaps even like a self-imposed fee and it can only be really small. Like there's 4 million of us roughly, and if it was like 0.25% of 1%, it's at the hip in our pocket. We'll barely notice it, but over 4 million people, that starts to add up.
It does. And of course, as soon as we have this conversation, there'll be people that raise concerns about taxes and the like. But really what I think we're talking about is how much do you care about something? And do you care about something to contribute to the longevity of that thing? And really, to me, it's a very rational discussion that we need to have about the way that we resource fishing, recreational fishing in general, into the future, because what we've been doing, frankly, hasn't been working. If you look back, our report card of the health of our waterways is declining. We're really gifted to have well-managed fisheries on a global standard, but the challenges, the environmental challenges, are mounting and as populations grow, and we need to find a new way. We can't expect people to solve our problems for us. It's as simple as that.
Toby Piddick said, answering your question earlier, for me, growth for enduring prosperity in this context means the increased fishing opportunities that would come with better ecosystem health, and the fish production that would follow. That's a great one, Toby. Any thoughts on that?
Eloquent. Yeah, no, I think that nails it. Yep. And if we start to also talk about the societal benefits that yields, families fishing together more, and so spending more time together, you know, and all of the benefits from being outdoors and away from computers and tablets. I think we're starting to get to a fairly well-rounded description with the contributions that people have made tonight about you know, what growth looks like and how we might describe that and measure that. And they're really important and they're useful to us because as Fisheries Research and Development Corporation, we're going through a process right now of asking how should we measure performance against our new strategic plan. So we're going to invest over the next 5 years. How do we measure that performance? And so these sort of thoughts really, really help us, and I appreciate that.
I know there's going to be greater focus on people's well-being with fishing, and I know I've had special insight in some of the information the National Rec Surveys around people's well-being, and I big fan of that we can use rec in all its different facets ways, improve our well-being through mental health, physical ability. I remember speaking to Professor Jackie Shermer the other day about how in Europe, doctors in Europe are now writing out vouchers for spending time in the outdoors rather than prescribing medicine, because it's having the same effect or even better. So we may be, who knows, be able to approach government and advocate for people use rec fishing to help them out in a big way through the medical profession. I'm speaking to...
It's just a shame.
Yeah. Sorry?
It's just a shame that you have to go to a doctor and get a certificate to be able to go outdoors and enjoy the outdoors, isn't it?
Well, it's a great...
walk out the door anytime you wanted.
It's a great alternative that they can offer. So my doc last week only did that for me. So I'm very grateful for that. So Danny Simpson says, for many in South Australia, it's an equitable share of the marine scale resource and retaining the freedom we have to fish pretty much where we want. So SA is a bit of a hot topic at the moment, so I think he's bang on. Cass Price, sorry?
The resource sharing challenge is a very charged issue, isn't it? And I think that as we navigate that, and we need to do better at how we navigate that, we need to understand that our liberty ends where someone else's begins, that we're in a very crowded, contested space. And so we need to be able to have really reasoned discussions supported by evidence of the benefits that we provide, the things that you're talking about, Adam, so that we can, so that those conversations about the value of letting recreational fishers have access to even more areas can be done and justified.
Cass Price says, responding to your question there, a broader range of people enjoying fishing on their own terms and being able to link up like-minded. For example, as much opportunity for family fishing functions as there are big team fishing comps. I'm a huge fan of that. I've kind of been burnt out last year or so, but what we had down here south, we had family functions. I hope that we reboot them when COVID kind of settles down. But Cass is bang on. And you know, if we can put our collective efforts together and kind of reboot that.
I completely agree, and the societal benefits, the lovely part of being around a campfire with mates that you don't catch up with enough, or your friends and family, is not to be underestimated, and is the most. I think it is actually the most the strongest driver for why people go fishing, and so it's funny that we spend so much time talking about the fish when it really is the people that drive us.
Oh yeah, right? It's you understand people, then handling the fish in the environment makes it much easier. So we've got someone that's looking after the Tuna Champions page. Oh no, the comment's gone, so I can't say it. So,
okay.
Paul Fish says, and one of the big barriers would be the trust issues rec fishers have with dealing with government. Rec fishers have long memories. He's right there. So, we mentioned that earlier on in this piece. I think there's a lot of work there still to do about mending those fences, rebuilding those bridges. Citizen science can help there by collecting that information to show that we are capable of doing what needs, or collecting the correct information to make good decisions. And when we're making good decisions and we're seeing the benefits from it, then that trust starts. A lot of the time, that trust, they don't want to hand that responsibility to us because we don't have capability or the information to make them. What do you think on thoughts on that?
I think going forward, a challenge for us will be for the fisheries managers themselves to see themselves, to recognise themselves as a part of the fishing and aquaculture community. They're an integral part. And understanding the role that they have for driving innovation, the responsibility they have for ensuring that the decisions are robust, made on good evidence, and they're human. And so not all the decisions will be good. And so acknowledging where there's opportunity for improvement, that builds trust. Transparency and integrity builds trust. And I think the stakeholders all of us have a role to play in contributing to the process and making sure that the evidence is as good as it can be and living with results that are evidence-based. And I think fundamentally, we will never get to that trust point if we think of government as an amorphous thing, this giant thing called government that can never be trusted, because government is a collective of individuals. I'm sure all of them with all of them with the greatest of intentions, but they're humans, they're imperfect. And so I think that what I think is we need to go further towards co-management, because when stakeholders make decisions in partnership with managers, there's a greater degree of acceptance and probably better decisions as a result, I think, in many cases. So I think we've got a lot of work to go. I completely agree with you. There's a need to mend those fences, but I think we all need to understand each other better to be able to do that.
So we got, I think we're about an hour or so in, so we might have to, right. We're nearly an hour, so we might have to think about wrapping it up. But before we move on to our wrapping up, everyone that's listening there is intention that we will, the rec sector will come together in the near future if we can get ourselves organised to create a big vision, a big plan for Australia. So any final thoughts on that, Matt? That we could do that?
It's a great idea. I think it's a great idea, and it's kind of like planting a tree. They say, when's the best place to time to plant a tree? And the answer is 10 years ago. And the second best time is now. So I think it's never been cheaper and easier to bring a collective of hundreds of people into a single place. We're doing it right now, to have a conversation. And I don't think I think the impediments to it are not as big as we realise, and we just need to get on with it.
Thanks for your time, Matt. It's always a pleasure speaking to you, picking your brain whenever I've got questions, and I'm sure plenty of other people can too, but you're only one person. But the FIDC is a great organisation to be working with. I wholeheartedly enjoy working with the FIDC.
We feel the same, Adam. You're doing a great job. Keep up the great work with these Tackle Box talks. Thanks everybody for having a listen and contributing in the chat. That was really wonderful, and looking forward to seeing the next one.
Thanks, Matt. Well, next week we have not Cassie Price. We have Jane Galashan from Tarfish in Tasmania, the Tasmanian peak body, and she'll be speaking about the changes of the nature of engagement with rec fishing. So how are we now communicating with rec fishing? How are representatives speaking to them and connecting with them, and then using those communications with the people, with the community, and then going back and advocating and on their behalf to make good decisions. So stay tuned next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time, and we'll speak to Jane then. See you later, everyone.